Hey, and welcome to this lesson. We are about to build this component right here. This component is all about choosing values between 0 and maybe 10. Of course, we can change that value to whatever we want to be, but this is good for small values because you have to go one by one up or down. And as you'll see, there's a lot going on here. We have these minus buttons dimmed there, and as we go up, it goes undimmed, and then if we go up to the 10, the plus button is going to be disabled. So a lot of things, conditionals here, maybe a bit more than in the last lessons, but nothing fancy, and we'll tackle all the details in the actual implementation phase. But before that, let's take a step back and let's see what kind of options do we have for choosing small values. So whenever we're building a component, as you've learned already in this wireframe phase we have in each of the lessons, that you have usually a lot of options for any kind of action or functionality you're going to build. So let's do the same again for this lesson, and I'll just expand this container here and draw another spacer here to denote that, okay, this is a new thing we are now doing. So what options do we have for choosing a value? The first thing could be an easy drop-down menu with just a value. Maybe here is some text that's select or choose or something like that. And then the user is prompted with a list of things like 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's a totally viable solution. It's built in into all of the browsers, so you don't need to code anything specifically, but to maybe style the select element here. And the second one, we could use a range slider. For instance, we could have here the slider, and then there would be maybe some indicator, okay, now you are on value 2, and then when you slide this thing all the way up here, it could be something like 7 up here. This is also a viable solution, and it's also native in browsers nowadays. And then third option, or this could be this is similar to the first one. We could have just a text box or number box with the little up and down buttons here, which are built into the browser text field if it's marked to be, the type is marked to be number. So we could have here 0 first, and then the user could go like up and down here and either select what kind of number they need. But I think all of these are good, but if you know that you are going to build something that you usually need the values between, say, 0 and maybe 5, and out of those even like 0 and 2 or 3 are the most used options, then we have this option that we are going to build today, which is the stepper with these nice plus and minus buttons. And say, let's start with 0 here. Because now, of course, you have to justify in your own use case that what's most viable solution. But in our case, if you were going to choose very small values, it's very easy to tap this button maybe once or twice and go ahead and immediately see the effect here in the changing number. When you're using a select button, you have to first click on that select button. Then second, you have to select the value. And third, you have to check if that value is actually the one you picked. If you click on this one, then you want to be sure that it actually is number 2. So it comes up here and you have to check, okay, that I selected the correct one. And then here with the slider, it's fairly hard to, you have to be very precise when scaling or moving this handle here. And as well, on mobile, this is probably not the most easy to use, and there's a lot of room for errors. And also the same with this stepper, native stepper in the number text field, is that it's very hard to click on mobile. So you have to manually go and maybe take the 0 first out, and then add the number manually and check if that's okay. I think most of the mobile devices usually nowadays give the number pad if you set the type of that. That's probably most horrible number pad. 1, 2, 3, 4, and you get the gist. So you have the number pad. It's fairly easy to select the number from there. But then again, if you click on any of these plus and minus buttons here or up or down, there are very, very small areas to click. So that's why we opted here in our use case to these plus and minus buttons, and let's go ahead and see how that could be designed. Before diving into the visual layout of this component, let's first draw it out in a more wireframe sense, because probably this is going to be not enough for our purposes. So let's start with that. I just take the pen tool, and what we want to do is to have a structure like this. Let's just first draw the container for our component. And what we want to have here is some sort of a label. Like what are we going to change with these numbers that are going to be here, as well as some descriptive text maybe here. Then we want to have the minus button as well as the number and the plus button right here. And we could of course go already in this at this phase to the level of detail that we know how would we code this. And of course, if you are more seasoned developer or designer, you probably already are thinking in terms of the structure of this component in code. But just the main parts of this are going to be this title section here, which is going to be title, and then another section here, which is going to be the input area. So this is mainly divided into two different sections. Then we have some spacing here for the whole component, and that's all. That's pretty much about it. So let's start making this component into a more visually appealing form. I'll take a copy of our base layer. You could, of course, here in Figma, go to your assets panel, and then in the components, take the base layer, and from there, we could also drag it here so that we have the same base layer. And for this component, that's because this is going to be a bit bigger than the ones we had earlier. I'm going to use a bit bigger spacing. So let's try the 32 pixel spacing here in this component. Let's add the label, and that could be, now it's the bold large, and that's good. And let's change the text color to be maybe the darkest blue, or even the darkest gray. Let's take that one. And then I'll just quickly align this to the grid. And here we go. And let's go down all the way, maybe 8 pixels, or is 4 good? Maybe 4 is good. And instead of the bold large, let's take medium and regular text and gray, maybe 600 is good. And let's add some placeholder text here. This could be, if we're choosing the amount of adults traveling, that would be adults, and then the people over 18 years old. And then let's expand that text field and add a dot there. And now we can work the plus and minus buttons. So let's start by drawing a circle here. This is probably a fine size. This is 50 by 50, which is okay also on mobile. For the fill, let's go to white, solid white, and for the stroke, let's take blue 500, and I think white pixel, 1 pixel is fine here. And let's align these properly. Let's make this so that the text, whichever one of these containers is going to be bigger, it's going to determine the height of this whole container. So let's take a look, 3 pixels up. Okay, so now this text here is, and let's actually make this a bit, or actually this determines the height, so because it's bigger than the text area. So let's go actually the amount of pixels back, the 3 pixels back. Here we go. So now we do have this button here, and then let's draw a rectangle to do the minus sign here. 2 pixels is fine. Let's go for 500 blue again. And as you've probably noticed, we are using the blue color quite a lot. I'll duplicate that, and then I spin that around to be, no, that's not probably the width we want. We want something even. And then, so 22 pixels, that was the duplicated one. And then let's center that at center, and then duplicate it, and then spin it around. And now, as we have this, let's take a look if we can center this one. Okay, this is the plus button, so let's move that to this side, and just take away the upper one from there. Okay, and we just still need the number here. We can move this a bit up, down, and let's add a number here, which would be maybe a regular. Let's start with 0, and let's actually make this text be automatic width. And here we go, and maybe also centered. And now let's give enough space for that number in the middle. Okay, maybe that's too much, and let's actually make it large and maybe bold. Maybe bold is too much. Let's just make it large. So large, maybe gray. Gray 900 is good. Of course, when it's dimmed, it's going to be something else like this, but let's go to that state later. I'll just take away these grids here. This is not looking too good. This spacing here, I group this one as well as this one. And so we can adjust these in a better manner. I'll take this away from the group of these title items here. And so one thing we need to know or need to have is that there's enough space for this number here to grow, so that if this goes to 10 or 10 plus, as we had in the example, there needs to be enough space for that. So this is already looking good, but maybe we want to make the title a bit larger. So let's go for the largest font we have, the extra large. Let's align this text under this adults, so it's going to be right under that. And now it's in the middle, and it's starting to look good. Now we have nicely aligned buttons and text here in this component. Of course, in this lesson, we are not going to build a mobile-friendly version of this. There's not much to change if we wanted to do that. We could have these buttons maybe, or this text area going smaller, and these buttons staying here next to the element and making this bigger, this container. And that's not a big feat, so it's something you want to try out yourself when building the actual component. But we are running or spending too much time if we try to tackle everything here. Okay, so now we have this one component, but what if we wanted to have two of these? So essentially, this component is I'll just group these so that this is going to be the input section, and this is going to be the title section. So the component essentially is these two components here. So these two sections, title and the input section. And this container usually is not specifically part of this component, because we could have this somewhere in line without this container. So this is a separate component as we separated out here. So essentially we put this component within the container component. So let's expand the container component a bit, and let's make another one. So what if we had multiple of these? This probably doesn't look too good if there's no space between them and no spacer. So it's hard to know. If I read this, I'm maybe confused that which one is which. Of course, here it's evident, but if we had more space between these and text area and the plus button and minus buttons, that would be a bit confusing. So let's add a small spacer there. I just draw a rectangle. Let's pick a color, maybe the same as border. I think the border was 200, maybe. And then let's make this height of 1 pixel. And then let's align it so that it starts from that and goes all the way. Whoa, I drew it exactly the right size to begin with. So let's take the same amount from the top as from the bottom. So that would mean 32 pixels. 32, let's make that also 32. Now it's, I think, 33, 32. And then let's draw this rectangle, so all the way down there. Okay, what more? 2 pixels maybe? Okay, so now we have this nicely spaced out set of two components. This could be children. The text doesn't really matter at this point. But now you start to see that how these kind of components are built. So it's very important to notice the structuring thing of the components. What is actually the component, and does it consist of many smaller components? Usually it does. So we could have this title here section as a separate component, because we could use this as a title section somewhere else in the application we're building, and maybe use this plus and minus button somewhere else without this title section here. So these could be also their own components. Now that we have this component here, we can make the styles for the hovered and focus styles also. So let's add some background color here. Maybe this blue. This could be the hover state, and then or the clicking state. And when you click on this, let's try if we can make this ellipse some shadow here, so that it would be drop shadow. If we put it blur at 0, can we make it this 0 here, and blur 0 also, and then spread. Let's try 4 pixels. Ooh, and then let's pick our blue color here within the local colors. I think this is 200 maybe, or 300. Yeah, I think that's good. So I think it was 200 in our design. So let's go with that value. So this would be the state when you are clicking the button, and then the number would change to say something like, now it's 3, and then we would go or undim that color to make it prominent that, okay, now we are actually doing something, or this whole thing is actually active. So now what do we need from this design is the plus and minus button icon. So I'll just go ahead and export these icons And depending on your system you're working with, there are probably different steps to that. So I'll just take it, name it icon minus. And then I'll take this plus thing here. I group these rectangles and I name it icon plus. And then I go ahead and hit export here. Also same for this, export here. So now we can just take this icon minus and icon plus and export these two layers as SVG. And from here, we could export these files, but I already actually done that. So if you want to try to do this yourself, of course, go ahead and export these plus and minus things you've designed and export them to the folder. And maybe rename them differently, because I think I used the icon minus and icon plus already in the SVG files that are in that folder already. But now we are ready to start actually building this component. Let's go and do that right now. So here we are in our text editor. I took a screenshot of what we are going to build from Figma. And again, I'm using an app called CleanShot for taking these screenshots and pinning them everywhere I like to show them. So that's a very good application I use. So let's go to the plus and minus folder, and you'll see I've included the minus and plus icons, but of course you can export your own if that's what you're into. And then let's take the start file here, and I'll just close that drawer on the left. So let's go over the structure of our component. Our component has this title section here, as well as the input section here. And then they are horizontally aligned nicely here. And then each of these sections have their sub items, like these buttons here, this title here, or label here, and then this description text here. So let's structure that in our HTML. Let's first make only one row and then duplicate that to adjust the styling for that use case too. So let's structure the contents for this component. First, what we need is going to be the two main sections that are going to be the title section and then as well as the input section. And with these two different areas, within the title, we want to have, I'll just use H3. In your use case, it could be something else. And let's call that label. And below that, let's make a paragraph. That's going to be description. And now we're good to go. Let's actually add those here. Label, adults. And then description, I'll just add an alarm of 10 words. It's good enough, or maybe a bit less for our use case. And then for the input, what we need here is, I'll just save this for now. Okay, we now already have this here. This component ready. The lesson ends here, and you're good to go. No, just kidding. Let's go on. Okay, so within the input, we need a button with a class of minus, so we can tell those two buttons apart. Then we need this thing number. And let's actually add a class already of dim for that, because we are going to add the dimming. The dimming is going to be the default state of this component of the number, and then we are going to take that class away when we go up the numbers. Okay, and then we need another button here with a class of plus. And let's take a look how that looks. It's looking good already. Let's save that. And for those buttons, what we are going to need is that we are going to need some icons here. So let's use an image, and for that image, let's use the source of our icon minus, and then because this is going to be only for decorative purposes, we don't want to add any alt tag for this, so we're going to put it here, but not put any content within it. Okay, so let's do the same here within the other button. So image and source is going to be icon plus. And alt tag, it's nothing to be there. Okay, and then, oh, the image went to the wrong place. It went within the number. Let's actually add 0 there to the number. And here within this button, let's add this plus. Okay, so looking good already. We have this title here, description, plus and minus and plus buttons, but it's probably not looking too good yet. So what we could do is add an input row. This is going to be a wrapper for this specific component, which has the title and the input sections. So let's take these in here. And now, nothing happened, of course, because this is just a wrapping div for this component. So let's start by styling these to our needs. And also what we need to do or want to do is to, instead of having just the centering div here, we can actually add also a class to that, and let's call that container. So now I think we have everything in place, and this container is going to be just the container component of this input row component. So let's start by styling these. Let's go to this style tag. So first we want to determine the width for the container. So let's add something, a variable for the root. So width container, and maybe 350, maybe. Let's add 450 pixels for now. And then let's style the container. And let's add a width of that width container. And let's see how it goes. Nothing, of course, changed, but it positioned here on the left because it's going to be wider. But let's start to add some more styles here. So let's center that thing. Margin. It's going to be 0 and auto. So this is going to be 0 margin on both top and bottom, and auto margin on left and right, if you're not familiar with that shorthand. And then let's add some background color so we know what we are working with. Background color. And it was, I think, color white is a good color for us. Okay, now we start to see some things going on. We don't actually need this margin auto because we are already centering this div with our base styles. So let's take that away. And then let's add some border. I think we had a variable for that. Let's go border. Let's see. Yes, we did. And then border radius. Oh, this is pretty. If we were building a real component system, we would of course have this box component or container component as its own component, so we don't have to style it every single time. But for now, for our purposes, let's just style it again. Border radius, var radius, and then we have the box shadow as our shadow. Now it's already looking a lot better. But as you'll see, the spacing of this item is not looking too good. So what we want to do, we don't want the component to limit the distance from the sides. And that's because we could have this same component here, maybe two of these on top of each other, but it could be without this container component. So let's have that padding we want to have on this container component on the left and right hand side. And let's use the margin or padding on the component itself to separate them from each other. So let's add padding, and top and bottom is going to be 0. And then we are going to use the space, maybe 8, I don't know, maybe 8. That seems about right, maybe 6. Well, let's see. I think 8's good. Okay, then I think actually if you take a look at the base start, we'll see our spacing 8 is equal to spacing 8 is 2 rem, which is translates to 2 times 16, which is 32, which was here in our original design. Okay, so let's style the input row itself. Input row, and let's first display it as flex. And that's going to give us a nice layout. not looking too good yet, but we're getting there. Let's take also that input area and display it also as flex. Display as flex. So now we get the buttons nicely aligned. And what we want to do now is to add the padding to the top and bottom of this component. Of course, this kind of spacing of the components, it depends on your use case. So you don't want the component usually to think too much of its positioning or spacing, but being the component itself only so that the surroundings can take care of the spacing. But in our use case, we're going to add some padding for this component so that we can nicely space it around if we have more of these components here. So let's add some top and bottom padding there. Let's use the same space, 8 there, and then 0 from the sides. Okay, so now we have that nicely aligned. How do we align this input thing to the right-hand side? In flex positioning, as this container is now, or this input row is now displayed as flex, we can just set the margin of this section here to be auto on the left, and that should do the trick. Margin, left, auto, and let's see. Yes, now we have that over there. So let's style these out of the way, the title here. I usually arrange my styles so that they go in the same order as in the structure of the component. So first we have the container, then the input row, and the first thing here is title, and then within that is label and description and so on. So let's use that same structure here in the CSS so it's easier to follow. So input row first has the title section. So let's add some margin, because now if we would make this smaller or bigger, this would go all the way, this text all the way to this. So we want to add some little space here between these two. So let's add some margin right. Margin row right. Let's use the same space of 8. So that keeps things consistent here. And let's take that back to, I think this is okay size. And then let's add the label, font size, bold. Not font size, but font weight, of course. And then font size should be, was it text extra large? Yeah, it was. And then description, label description. Let's add color. Let's change the color of that to be maybe gray 700 maybe. Oh, it's not matching the description. Oh, because it's color gray. That makes sense. Okay, that's okay. Maybe even 600 to make it a bit lighter, and that's still, I think that's still accessible. And next, let's tackle these buttons. So let's take the single button component or element, and then let's display that also as flex. Display flex, because now we can easily align these align items, center, and justify content. Let's justify the content to center. So now we have those nicely aligned. Let's add some width and height. Width. Let's use space. As I told earlier, you can definitely use here something like a separate value here. So this could be like size button or button size variable, and then use it here. But I'll just use the space 12 maybe. Let's take a look. Oh, that's kind of big, but it's okay because now we're zoomed in here. We have to take into that account. Let's adjust the height also. So it's going to be the same. And then let's make these corners rounded, border, radius, round. Looking better. That border is probably not looking what we want, so let's change that. 1 pixel, solid, and then color blue 500. Okay, and then background color. Let's set that to be the color white. Okay, we are getting closer. Let's just move this border up there in the hierarchy so that it's next to the width and height and things that actually affect the layout. And then we have these things that don't affect the layout at the bottom. Okay, so for the number, what we want to do, let's take the number class. I think it was it number? Let's take a look. Where is it? Here, button input, and then we have this number with the dim class. Okay, number. And for the number, what we want to do is that we don't want to say, we could add padding of 0 from top and bottom, and then maybe just 10 pixels. And then that would be okay. But what if we change that number to be something else than 0? Maybe the 10 plus we are probably going to have here. Then it's going to shift the layout. So we don't want that. What we want to do instead is to set a fixed width for this container and then center the text within that container so that it every time keeps the same width independent of what's going on in the number. So let's get rid of this. And let's first add the font size. Font size, which was the text large. Now make it a bit bigger. And then let's add a minimum width. Min width of maybe, let's try space 12 again here. Oh, that's okay. And let's align that text to center. So text align center. Okay, now if we go and change the number to the 10 plus, it's going to be totally fine. And these position of these buttons don't change at all. Let's actually make that a bit larger so we'll see everything better. Okay, so let's get that back to 0 and that text align center. Okay, what else do we need? This is not yet looking too good, so let's align these items of the whole container so that they're properly aligned. So for the input, what we want to do is to, now it's flex, we are going to align the items to center. And boom! Now we are actually closer to what we want to do. Let's add some basic styles for these buttons, the hover styles, the active and focus styles. So we have a bit fancier look than this basic outline that this button has. So let's do that. Button, hover. So let's change the background color to be var color blue 200. Now when we hover over the button, it's going to look like that. And then let's also add the cursor being pointer so that it actually looks like something you can click. And for the focus styles, button, focus, let's get rid of the outline, none. You could of course add this cursor and outline declarations also here on the button itself, but now I added here them on the specific styles they actually affect. There's two schools for that, so pick the one that you like. And then let's add the focus shadow here. Shadow or box shadow. And for that, let's make it so that it's going to be 0, x-axis, y-axis blur, but then we want the spread to be 4 pixels. And for that, let's add the color blue, and I think 200 is okay. Let's take a look, and now let's go ahead. Oh, that looks good. And then when I hover over it and click on it, it looks already better. We still need the click color to be different, so let's change already that. And we can actually take this box shadow here out, and let's make a variable out of that. So let's call it shadow focus. I don't know actually, did we do this already on last lesson? Well, at least let's do it now. Shadow focus. Now let's call that shadow focus. If it was here already, this is my mistake. Go ahead and just use the shadow focus if it was here already. And then let's go back. Oh, this is wrong one. Okay. So now, what about the active styles? Let's add them too. Button active. And let's change the background color to be color blue 300. Okay. So now whenever I click on this, it's going to be shown that I'm actually clicking this. And this is nice. I can use both keyboard and mouse on these buttons as we're using the native button element. So some developers do this, like add a basic div and then recreate all the functionality, but that's usually a waste of time. There are probably some use cases for that or justification for that kind of things too. But in our case, this is going to be totally fine to use the regular button component or element. And then what we want to do for the dim is that let's add the dim class here, and let's set the color of that text to be something different. Color gray. Let's try 400 if that's okay. Okay, now it's dim enough so that we know that it's going to be dimmed. And one thing yet to do here in the CSS and HTML is that we want to make this button dimmed as by default, because you can, from 0 in our use case, there are use cases where you could go below sub-0 values, and that's totally fine. But in our case, we want to dim this button or disable this button before we go above 0. So let's set this button to be the first button to be disabled. And then let's style that button which is disabled. So let's take the button. And this is a way to target these states, is that you can add the curly brackets and then put the disabled there. Let's set the opacity down, all the way down to opacity, maybe 50. Let's try that. Yeah, that's good. And then let's take all the pointer events away from that. So pointer events, none. And what this does is that when you hover on this or you click on this button, nothing happens, because now the CSS makes sure that you cannot click this. This is just to remove the styles, the focus and hover styles and active styles from this button, these are style related. So because the button itself is already disabled. Okay, so I just could select this icon here. Maybe that's not what we want on this button. So let's get rid of that too. Let's make an class for the icon. I think it was icon. Was it image class icon? No, it's not. Let's create an icon class here for both. Class icon. So now we have that there, and let's use a property called user select, and then let's set that to 0. This is something you can use to make sure that user can actually select image here within this button. Okay, so what if we now had 2 of these here? We only have now 1, so let's go ahead and tackle that use case too. So let's duplicate the input row, and let's change the title just to children, and save. Okay, so it's pretty okay, as you can see, but we are missing the nice divider line here. So let's go ahead and do that. For the input row, let's add a border bottom of our nice border variable. Okay, looking good. But one problem is that we also have it here on the second input row. So what what can we do is that we take the input row and we target the last child of this row. Because if we had more of these, say 4 or 5 or 7 or whatever number, then we could just target the last child and then remove that border from that one. So border button 0. Okay, now we do have the basic structure here, and we want to go into the actual functionality to make this work. Of course, if you want to work on the mobile styles, you feel free to do that, but we are totally fine with these styles. And it doesn't need that much tweaking to make it work on mobile too. Okay, let's get rid of this, because now we already have done this. I'll just zoom this out to see everything looks okay. Okay, so let's start by talking about the functionality. As now we have a bit more things to do than in the last lesson. Let's start by typing out the things we want to do. Let's go to the JavaScript tag here and start doing our things. Okay, so what we want to do, in the last lesson with the button, you learned that whenever we click any of these buttons here, JavaScript is going to know that. So we can grab the event, which is going to be the click event, and then do something based on that. And also, as you learned in the button example, is that we want to know which button was clicked, and we already did that in the button lesson, but let's do that all over again. Let's just write out the steps we want to do. So the first thing we usually want to do in vanilla JavaScript is to get these elements. We want to get this button, all of these buttons here, and what we also want to do is get this number here, and then we want to know if what each of the buttons are. So this is plus button, this is minus button, and so forth. So let's first tackle those. So let's first get the clicked element, which is going to be the button. Then second, let's get the parent of that, parent element of that button. And you'll soon know why we do that. And from there, let's get the number, which is within that parent. So essentially what we're going to do, we're going to get this button here based on the event, and then we are going to do something that is called traversing in JavaScript. So we are going to travel upwards from this element to the parent, which is going to be this input container. And from there, we are looking for this number so that we'll get the right number. So if I click here, we travel up to the parent of this button here, which is going to be this input container. And from there, we get this number. So whenever we click this button or this button, we know what number to change in the DOM. Okay, and then let's get the minus and plus buttons. Get the minus and plus buttons. And then what we want to do, we want to change the number based on the click. So it's going to be either plus or minus. Or minus. Okay? And then as the last step, let's 6.1 is disable and enable buttons based on the number value. So if this goes all the way up to the 10, we want to disable this button. Whatever this is something between 1 and 9, we want to have both of these buttons enabled, and when this is 0, we want this to be disabled. So there's some logic we're going to work out. As well as the maybe an and undim / dim the number. Okay, so these are going to be the next steps. So let's work on those. How do we get the clicked element? Well, first, before actually that, there's going to be step 0, which is going to be get all the buttons. Get all of the buttons. And first, let's call that, again, this is going to be a variable called buttons. And this time, last time we chose just one button, but this time we are going to select all of these buttons. So we are going to use something called query selector all, which is a method in JavaScript. First, let's take the document, which is our HTML document. And from there, let's query with the selector of button, and let's get all of these buttons. If we would use only query selector, this would go ahead in the document and look through the whole document. Okay, let's go to the body, let's go to the container, let's go to the div, input row, title here, nothing here, no buttons here. Aha, I found a button, says JavaScript, and then it would end there. But if we use the query selector all, it's going to look for all of the button elements in the document. So that's exactly what we want to do. And then for all of these buttons, we want to do, because we were already talking about the that we need the event to detect the clicks and these buttons. So what we're going to do is we are taking our buttons we just defined up here, and for each of those, I think we did this already in the first lesson when we grabbed the bars of the loading container component. So for each of these buttons, let's do something. Let's call this is going to be the single button element, and we can loop through for each of the buttons and do something to each of those buttons. So for each of the button, let's go ahead and add a function. And here within the function, we want to listen for the click. So let's add an event listener for all of these buttons we have. So button add event listener, and let's listen for the click event again. And then we'll have the event from which we can just make a function. Now we get into this, I'll just move this here within this function. Okay, so now what we can do is get that specific button. So const element is going to be the event and current target. And let's just log that element so that we actually do have it correctly. Event or element. Okay, and now when I hit any of these buttons, plus here, okay, it has this. As you can see, when I hover on this, it's going to be show that this button was clicked. If I go here, nothing happens because this is disabled. And if I go hit here, you'll see that JavaScript knew that I clicked this button and clicked this button because it knew where the event came from. And this is exactly why we took that or put that into a separate element variable here. Okay, so how do we get the parent element from there? Let's go and do that also. So const parent is going to be the element which we defined here. And from that element, there's something called in JavaScript that is parent node. Parent node, not done, but parent node. And let's log that, log parent. This is a good practice to just log everything as you do so that you actually know that everything's going smooth. So let's click here, plus. And now, instead of the plus button, what we got was the input container. And same here. If I click here, I got this input container. And that's because we went from this button to its parent, which is this input container. Okay, so now we have the parent. Good. And how do we get that number from there? Let's call that number container, because actually what we get is the number element or container. We could call that element too, but let's just keep the number container. And then from the parent, we can query for selector, not all, but only one, because there's only one number we want, is with class number. And let's see if we got that. Log, right, number container. And when I click on that, boom! Now when I click on this, we also, in addition to the element itself, which was clicked, and the parent, we also have the container for the number. So how do we get the actual number out here? Because we want to change that number. How do we get that number out of here? Let's do that now. So let's add const number, going to be number container, and then text content. So this is a way to get the text content of any of elements, which is going to be 0. So now when I click here, let's log that number, log number, not the container, but the number. Okay, when I hit here, woo, I got the 0. And I got another 0 when I click on here. What if I change that number to be something else? Say, for the first one, let's make it 2, and let's make it here 100. So what do I get? 3 and 100. Boom, 300. Nice. Okay, let's switch those back to zeros again, and let's continue with our JavaScript here. So how do we get the minus and plus buttons then? Well, easy. It's totally the same logic here. Const, let's call them increment and decrement. So let's take the parent again. Parent, I have some problems with parents. That sounded worse than it should be. Okay, parent, and then let's, from there, query with selector of increment was probably plus, maybe. And then decrement was minus. Let's just log both of these. And what we can do actually in the log also is that I can type here increment, and decrement. So now I should have both of those when I click here. Okay, I got the plus, I got the minus. So now we have this element which was clicked, we have this, its parent, we have this plus and minus buttons, and we have this number. So we do have all the elements within what we want to change when clicking any of these buttons. So we are already making great progress here. But how do we change this number here to be something else? When I click on this, or if I click on the minus button here, which is not going to be disabled after we pass the 0, how do we get this number to change? First, we need to determine if this button was plus or minus, which was clicked, and then change this number to something else. And what we also need to do is get the original number and then add 1 to it, or minus 1 from it. So the logic here is that if the element we click here includes class of plus, then add to this number, and if it includes a class of minus, then minus. So how do we do that in JavaScript? Well, we can create a new variable called const new number. We can do something. This is going to look a bit weird if you're not comfortable with programming, but let's first go through it, and I'll try to explain it to my best. So let's take the element, and that element has something called class list, and this is already what we used in the last lesson with the button. This class list is just a list of all of the classes. So from that class list, we can check if it contains a class that includes the word plus. So what this is going to give us, if I'm just going to check what this is going to be, I'm going to log the new number. And what's going to be, I'm going to hit here plus. It says true. If I type here something else, it doesn't include it. It's going to say false. Okay, JavaScript tells us this button now doesn't include a class that has this text in the class name. But when it has the plus, it's going to say true. And now comes in something that's called a ternary operator. And this is just a simple form or short form of making if and else statements. So bear with me, this is going to be a bit weird at first, but then you'll probably get the gist of it very quickly. So if this is true, we add a question mark, and from there we can determine what to do if this is true, and then we're going to add a colon. This is if true is going to happen, and then if not, if false. After this colon here is what's going to happen if that's false, that statement. So let's go back and get rid of these. And then now what we want to do, we want to change this number. So if this is true, that it really has the plus, we want to change the new number to actually be number plus 1. And if it doesn't have the plus minus, in our case it means that it's going to have the minus, we want to remove 1 from that number. Let's get rid of this log here. So now what we want to do is that we want to replace this number here with the new number. So we can take the number container and change its text content to be the new number. So now let's save this and see what happens if it works. And I just add one number. Oh, 1, 1, 1. What? What's going on here? Why does it add those? Why doesn't it change to 0 but adds those weird numbers on top of it? Oh, well, that's weird. It's actually not weird, because the reason why JavaScript works this way is that JavaScript is a dynamically typed language, so it tries to detect what's going on. And when we got this number container and its number, this number is actually, in terms of how JavaScript sees it, is not a number, but a string of text. So it's essentially like this, as when it should be like this. So this is a number, and this is a string with a number. So what we want to do is we want to convert this number variable to be an actual number. Let's refresh that one and try how that works. So how we can do that is that we can use a built-in function in JavaScript called parse float, and then wrap this whole number container within this parse float function. And what this is going to do is going to parse this content and try to make it a floating point number. That's just a fancy term for numbers in JavaScript. And let's not go too deep into that now. And now I hit save, and let's see what happens. Ooh, now it goes up. It goes all the way up as high as we want to go. Sky's the limit. Okay, maybe we can go to 50. Great. So now it's essentially working, but the problem is that we can't go down. So how do we do that? Okay, So here we have the last step as to disable and enable buttons based on their number value. So what we want to do is that we want to enable this minus button whenever we go past 0, and we want to disable this plus button when we go up to 10, and maybe add this little nice plus also here to it. Although I don't know, what does that mean? Do you take like 10 plus adults with you when you're booking a flight? Maybe that's not the use case for that, but just for the fun reasons, we can add that there to see how to work with strings and numbers. Okay, so now we are going to use some JavaScript magic, or so-called conditionals, which are if and else. And what we did here already included if or else. So this, if this is true, this JavaScript asks you like, okay, this is this thing. Is that true? Is that true? If it is true, then do this. If it's not true, then do this. And we are going to do the same, but as we have more steps here, we want to use the original or the good old if statement. So let's start by adding an if statement, if, and now VS Code already expanded this abbreviation of if to the whole if statement. If statement works so that we have the if statement here, and then parentheses is going to be the condition, and then there's a code block to do something. So what we can check is that if this value is somewhere between 1 and 9, then we want to have all of these buttons selected, right? So let's do that first. Let's actually define these min and max values also as variables so that we have them handy. So let's go here. This is going to be 0.1. That's probably not the way to do this, but okay. Set boundaries. And let's add const min equals to 0 and const max equals 10. Okay, now we have those. So let's go and add that first condition here. So if the new number is a number we get after we click this, where this is going to go, if the new number is higher than the minimum value, and now comes a new operator for you, it's a double ampersand, and this means and. So there are two conditions. This one is first condition. If this is satisfied, then JavaScript goes and tries a second condition, which is going to be that if also new number is smaller than the max value. Then what we want to do, okay, so the new number is going to be, in our case, this is now going to be 1. We want to undim this, right? But if this is also below the max value, which is going to be 10, then we run this. But now actually it wouldn't run anymore because we went past to the max value. It's not less than max. If we wanted to include the max value, we could use less or equal than the max, but now we want to use just less than the max. So what we want to do here is we want to undisable or enable these buttons. So let's do that first. Let's say the decrement, what was the button called? These minus plus buttons. So the decrement, we want to decrement, set the disabled state of that to false, and let's do the same for the increment. And then between these two states, so that 1 and 9, we want also to remove the dim class there. So how do we do that? We get the number, I think it was this one. No, or the number container. So we get the number container, which is this one, and remove the class of dim we had there, because the number container is going to be this element here, and it has the dim class ready. So let's get rid of that. So number container class list remove dim. Okay, now we have some logic going on. Let's see how that works. If I go, everything went smoothly. This should turn to more dark, and this should be enabled. Ooh, it did exactly that. And what if we go all the way up there? Well, nothing happens. So what happens is that now when we go down, we can actually go even more down because we don't have any rules what to do if this goes below. We only have that the new number is bigger than min, or the new number is a bit smaller than the max value, which is 1 and 10 accordingly. So we don't have any rules what to do with these cases. So let's start adding these rules. And now we can actually add more if statements in the same chain, so that we can add else if here. So if this happens, if this condition and this condition are true, do this, but else if, and we can add more conditions. And now actually let's do it so that we have the if statement there first, and then this is going to be the else if. Now let's move this here, and then have this, we can get rid of this now. And now the first condition is that if the new number is equal to 0, then we have to disable this. So let's do that. If new number is equal to 0, and we are using these 3 equal signs here to also check the type. So if we whenever you're assigning things, you use 1, as we did with like have done thus far. And then if I use 2, this is going to be checked. But now, if this would be either a string of 0 or 0, that would be true. But we want to check that it's going to be a number, so we use triple equal signs. And usually you want to use the triple when checking things. So I'll always use that. And if that causes some problems, then try to look why that's so. Okay, so we want to check if that new number is equal to the minimum value. And then we want to do what? Well, we want to set this disabled. So let's do that. Set decrement and set that disabled to be true. True. Okay. And then we also want to add the dim class back here. So let's do that. So number container, class list, add dim. Okay. So now if we go up, woo, nice. What if we go down? Back to 0. Boom. That's great. But we still can go past the max value we define here. So how do we do that? How do we fix that? Well, another if statement to the rescue. So else if. So now we have, this is if it's equal to the min value, and if the number is between the minus and the max value. And then what we want to do is we want to check that if the value is equal to the max value, right? So new number equals max. And then what we want to do, we want to grab that plus button and set that to disabled. So increment disabled equals true. Let's try that out first. Let's go all the way to the max value now, because now we are on 9. It still satisfies this condition. It's below the max. But now when we go to 10, which is the max value here, we are going to be, this condition is only condition that is satisfied, so that we have the new number is equal to the max value. So it should disable the increment button. Let's go there. Ooh, it did exactly that. JavaScript is a wise guy, knows what to do. Okay, as long as we know how to tell JavaScript what to do. But now, what if we wanted to add this little plus sign here, even though it's probably not applicable for this specific use case, but let's just play around and try how that works. So let's take the number container, and let's change that text content to be, and now we are using, again, these backticks. Just make sure that we could, let's actually first do this the old way and then that new way. So what could we do is that we could set this, the new number plus, and then a plus sign, and this would add, now when that is going to hit the max value, the 10, then the number container text content, which is going to be this, is going to be changed to new number plus add a little plus there. So let's see if that works. Now hit 10. Ooh, it did work. Even though now that this text content has this plus thing here, this row right here, this parse float is going to parse that 10 plus and determine, okay, probably that's a number of 10. So it's going to convert that to a number of 10. And then when we hit minus, it's going to minus 1 from there, and it's going to be 9 again. So everything's good to go. But if you want to go the fancier way, you use the backticks, which were introduced in ES6, which is a major revision of the JavaScript language. We can use this $sign and curly brackets to make use of JavaScript within these backticks, and then add the new number, and then just add the plus to the end of that number. And that should do the exactly same thing. Okay, the whole thing is working. There are some things in some browser when we go past, especially when using the keyboard, if we go past the specific value, it's going to keep this selected even though it shouldn't be. So what you could do is that whenever you hit this line, you can just take the element, which is going to be the button that is clicked, and then use this built-in method called blur, which is going to make sure that the focus of this is taken away. And we can do the same here below the 0. At least I think on Safari, as of recording this, there was some problems with Safari with that. You don't see any change here now on Chrome, but maybe on Safari you'll notice that it's going to fix that focus thing. And this is probably a good place also to note that if you are familiar with any of the JavaScript frameworks like React or Vue or Angular or whatever, you have probably heard something called state. And a state is how those frameworks essentially work is that you keep a state in them, that how things should be, and then the templates of that framework will take care of changing everything here in the view layer. And what we are essentially doing here is that we are storing the state here in the DOM, and that was the way to go like many years ago, and you can still do it right now, but that's just good to know. If you're working with those frameworks, you'd probably want to keep the state somewhere else than in the DOM as we are doing here. If you're not a seasoned developer, that's something you're probably going to learn when you try to dig deeper into these frameworks. And it's good to know how these things used to work so that you'll know, because all of these frameworks are also just JavaScript, so they work behind the hood or under the hood, they work exactly the same, but they just do it in a fancy way. And one thing regarding accessibility we still want to do is that because these buttons don't have any text, they have just the icon here. So we want to tell the browser that what's going to happen when you click this button here. And how we can do that is add an area label. An area stands for accessible rich internet applications, if I don't remember wrong. And for that area label, we can add something like, in case of the minus icon, like decrease by 1. And then let's just copy that for the other button here, which is going to be increase by 1. So now, if there's a user who's using maybe screen reader and then going above this button and going to another button, you can see that it's going to tell the user that, okay, this button is increased by 1. And if I go to the minus button, it's going to be decreased by 1. If there were none, the user wouldn't know what's going to happen when clicking on the button because it doesn't have any button text. Another approach would be to add actually the text here and visually just hide it so that the screen reader would know. Some of the CSS frameworks include those kind of classes like screen reader visible or something like that, so that they make sure that it's hidden in the regular browsers or regular users who use mouse and keyboard, but shown to the screen readers. But in our case, it's an easy way to tell the user that these decrease by 1 and increase by 1 with the area label. Let's just quickly make a run through of the JavaScript because this was a bit more complex than what we had earlier. So first we got the buttons. We got this take the document, which is the whole document here in our page. And then we look for selectors that have the button element. And this is an element of button, not a class. If this had a class of button, we could target like this. And then we took all of those buttons, and for each of those buttons, we took a single button and added event listener, which listened for the click event. And then we took the event, and from that event, we formed these selectors or variables. First, we took the element itself, which is the click button. Then we took the parent of that button, which is this whole container here. I think I can just highlight that for. So this input thing here is this parent. And then the number container is that number here. And we have the number there, which is 0. And we wanted to parse that to be actually a number, because the JavaScript doesn't know that this 0 should be a number. So we just parse that to be a real number. And then we took the increment and decrement buttons, which were these, button plus and minus. And then we determined the new number conditionally based on the click event if the element we clicked has the class which has text plus. And this has it and this doesn't. So when it has, add 1 to number. If it doesn't, remove 1 from the number or decrease by 1. Then we change the text content of the number container. And if you can see, this actually reads like English. So we take the text content of the number container to be the new number which is determined here. Then we made some conditional magic here. And we checked if the new number is equal the minimum and maximum value we determined here. And then made the decrement button to be disabled, and as well added some dim class to this here, and then blurred this element because that caused some problems on some browser. Then we checked if the number is between 0 or 1 or 9, and then do the things that disable, make these buttons enabled, as well as undim this number. And when we go past that or reach the maximum value, then just disable this button and add this plus here, and also add the blur to make sure, or defocus would be a better word for this. Okay, but that's it for this lesson. See you in the next video.